Practice makes perfect. This is probably a slogan that you have come across before, right? I have come across this myself many, many times, and to some extent I did believe in this slogan, but it wasn't until it was after I learned about the brain and how the brain works that I truly believed in the power of this slogan. I am fascinated by the brain. Of course, I wasn't always this fascinated. I never grew up wanting to study the brain or become a neuroscientist, and even back in high school, I don't particularly remember that this was something that the brain was something that was an awesome organ. In fact, for the most part of it, I think I took my brain for granted. I took all brains for granted. I was not aware of the amazing workings of the brain. How our brains literally impact so many kinds of our behaviors, from thinking, making decisions, feeling emotions, making memories, and feeling hungry. It's just quite amazing, isn't it, that a single organ can contribute to so many different types of our behaviors. So I came across the brain in a couple of classes, a psychology class in high school, and then another psychology class and a counseling class at university. And through these classes, I learned of how the brain works and how it impacts various types of our behaviors and our mental health. And after that, I decided I wanted to learn more about the brain. I found it quite fascinating. And so I decided to take a minor in neuroscience back in university so that I could take more courses in the brain and learn more about the brain. And I think till date, this decision that I took to take a minor in neuroscience was the turning point of my career, because right now, what I want to do for the rest of my life is study the brain. What I've learned so far from these classes that I've taken about the brain has helped me look at this organ in a whole new light. And I hope that by listening to me today, you'd probably look at your brain in a new light too. To give you the most impactful neuroscience lesson that I have had, we'll have to go back to the basics, and I'll try my best to not be too boring. So our brains are made of many, many basic units, and this basic unit is called a neuron or a nerve cell. And you can imagine that to be this red marker. We have 86 billion of these red markers in our brain. And just to put that into a context so that you can imagine it better, that is a bit more than 10 times the entire world's population. That's a lot of cells, right? So these cells, the neurons in our brain, they form many, many connections with each other, and they network with other neurons. You know, something like when you would talk to your friends, and so these neurons also connect with other neurons and form many networks. And to put it simply, it's these activity of the connections that give rise to the various behaviors that our brain is responsible for. So something about these connections is that they are not permanent. They are not fixed. They keep changing over time based on what we do, based on our experiences. So that is why when you guys are at school and listening to your teacher teaching, you're able to learn new things every day. You're able to remember things. That's because your nerve cells, they form new connections. And it's also why we sort of tend to forget things, maybe you miss a couple of lessons at school, or sometimes we forget our grocery list, all sorts of things. So we tend to forget also because these neuronal connections change over time based on our experiences. And these changes that happen to the nerve cells, the neurons in our brain, is what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. And essentially, It is how the brain changes based on our experiences and what we do. So the good news is we have control over these changes that happen in the brain. So as I mentioned, neuroplasticity is why we both remember and forget. So you might be wondering then what can we do really to make sure that the connections, the changes that happen to the brain are mostly good? That is, how can we remember more and forget less? I mean, that's something we all want to know about, right? So the key here is really persistence or practice. And that's where the slogan, practice makes perfect, will make even more sense. So if you put in the practice, the effort, and you're consistent with this, right? In things like maybe learning a new lesson, learning a new song on the guitar, or trying out a new hobby or a sport. If you put in the practice, the effort, and you're consistent with this, then what happens is the neurons in your brain, the connections they form, they get stronger and stronger and stronger. And so you are able to remember the activities. The neuronal connections, they contribute to some sort of an activity, so like learning a song, and then you can remember this task better and better when you keep practicing. On the other hand, if you are not very consistent with your practice, you don't put in as much effort, and you miss some sorts of the training, then what happens in your brain is that the neuronal connections involved in that activity, they get weaker and weaker and weaker, and over time, you forget. To put it basically, the more you practice, the more you put in effort and consistency in your training, the neuronal connections involved in the various activities you try out, they get stronger, and that helps you remember better. So this was the most impactful neuroscience lesson that I have had, and it was so meaningful to me because it made me think, oh, if this is how our brain cells work, then if I wanted to do something really, really challenging and hard, so in my case, that would be learning a dance routine. It's something I find super challenging. I mean, I think I learned the steps, I think I got the steps right, but then when you put in the music, yeah, I did not get it right. So I realized that, okay, it's a challenging thing, but if I do put in the effort, the practice, and the consistent training, then over time, eventually, I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, but over time, my neurons involved in learning the dance routine will get stronger, and I would, remember the routine better. So this sort of a mindset is called a growth mindset. Okay, and this is something I learned from a fellow TED speaker, Professor of Psychology Carol Dweck at the University of Stanford, based in the USA, which is where we believe that our skills, our abilities, they can grow and we can improve when we put in the effort and the practice. And the opposite of a growth mindset is a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is where you tried something you want to do, but you find it hard, you fail at it, and then you're like, yeah, I can't improve, my skills cannot grow, that's it. So coming back to our slogan, practice makes perfect. Now, looking at this in terms of how the brain works, how the neurons form connections, it really does make sense, doesn't it? But I just want to tweak this a little bit more to make it more accessible for us, because perfect might be a bit too realistic, too idealistic. So this is difficult to write. Okay. Yeah. Practice makes progression. You might be not able to see it, but practice makes progression. So by putting in the practice, the effort, and consistency in your training, you can make step-by-step progress in trying new things and learning new things. So remember, learning is a process, and processes take time. So as you learn today, you also need to put in the effort, the practice, and the training. And this is because that helps the neurons in your brain to become stronger and help you remember the task better. You have control over shaping your brain and its neuronal connections, because your amazing brain is plastic. So the next time you fail at trying something you like, Tell yourself that you have the space to grow and improve because your brain changes based on what you do and when you persist. Thank you.